DC is famous for having some of the most ridiculous retcons in the history of comics. From bringing characters back to life, to changing their physical attributes for unnecessary reasons, to developing irrelevant character motivations, or just flat out rebooting their universe because the continuity is messy as hell, there's a lot of times in the comic giant's history that have been tainted by strange and unsettling retcons. So today, we are taking a look at some of the most controversial with our list of the top 10 scariest DC retcons. These are retcons that are jarring, absurd, and downright scary, in the sense that DC would be willing to make such a bold move or moves to beloved or iconic narratives. Many of these retcons seem convenient, despite causing more of a headache for readers attempting to follow along. So with that in mind, let's get to it. And at number 10, Joe Chill who? One character that is critical to the Batman mythos but is constantly subjected to changes is Joe Chill, the petty criminal who killed Bruce Wayne's parents in that alleyway when he was a boy. For starters, Joe Chill being the one responsible was briefly retconned in the 90s with Zero Hour, and the truth was left hanging for years concerning whether or not Chill was really the one behind the Wayne's deaths. Then, in 2006 Infinite Crisis issue 6, he was confirmed to be their killer once again. But let's backtrack a little. This is where it gets annoying, frustrating, and a little scary, if messing with continuity or the thought of doing so is something that is frightful to you, which it should be, especially considering all of the mess that DC has created with Joe Chill. The way in which Batman discovers that Joe is his parents' killer has changed time and time again. It seems as if every several years we get a new take on Bruce's origin story, and him confronting Joe, or him rediscovering that Joe was the one who pulled the trigger, or him hunting him down and having some big moral dilemma about the whole darn thing. There have been multiple variations pertaining to Joe Chill's fate, various suspects, various storylines in which DC characters have believed to find new evidence, and then hunted down the real person responsible. Initially, we got a glimpse of this back in Detective Comics issue 33 in 1939. That was when we got Batman's origin story for the very first time. In 1948, in Batman issue 47, that man who murdered the Waynes was revealed to be a guy named Joe Chill. But then, the story changed again in 1956, then another time in 1968, then again in 1969, again in 1972, 1976, another time in 1982 where he was the Joker's hitman, and that whole storyline would then be shown in the 1989 Batman movie, then again in 1984, 1985, 1986, 1987, 1989, 1998 in which Selina Kyle witnessed their murders, in 1999 in which the Wayne board was really behind it, 2001, 2003, 2006, 2008 in which Joe Chill commits suicide thanks to Batman's persuasion, 2012 in which the Penguin was suspected to be behind the hit, 2015 in which Batman encounters him through the powers he develops from the Mobius chair, and so many more adaptations that we didn't even cover. Most of the ones we did were in the comics, but there's a lot of stuff in the animated universe as well, and in other movies, and in Gotham. So if that didn't make sense as to why it's scary, here is another reason why it is pretty darn frightening. All of this retconning literally threatens to change Batman's mythos every single damn time that his origin story is redone. It's frightening. DC, please stop giving us new reasons and new scenarios in which we see Batman have to relive his previous trauma and choose whether or not to kill the man who killed his parents, who may have not actually been the man who killed his parents. Moving on to number 9, Jason Todd's hair. This one's a little less stressful than our last number. Back when Jason Todd was first introduced in the comics in 1983, it was as Dick Grayson's replacement, with the former Robin now heading the Teen Titans team. While it was a great thing that the new Teen Titans title was selling, DC felt that Batman may suffer from this, and introduced a brand new Robin that debuted in Batman issue 357. In his first few appearances, he was distinguished from Dick Grayson by having strawberry red hair, which was later changed because the character lacked popularity. So DC strove to make Jason Todd a little bit more like Dick. While that's technically a retcon in itself, perhaps what's even better is the fact that this change in hair color is something Todd would later on address after he was brought back from the dead. More on that later. Todd would admit that when he was Robin, Batman made him dye his hair to look more like Dick Grayson. While he never gives a full reason for Bruce making him do this, it's implied it's some sort of marketing ploy. But really, it just kind of feels like Batman fetishized Grayson, if we're being honest. And at number 8, Martha Kent has a miscarriage. Moving away from the Dark Knight and onto the Man of Steel now, we've got another take on retconned origin stories. In 1986, John Byron rewrote Superman's origin story in the limited series The Man of Steel. In this limited series, the Kents take Clark in as per usual, but Byron added an extra little detail. Prior to finding little Kal-El, Martha had a miscarriage. The Kents decided to exploit that miscarriage and pretend that Clark was actually their own. Guess that's one way of getting out of, neighbors asking questions. So why is this bothersome? It's the fact that the miscarriages became the motivation for why they adopted Clark rather than, out of the goodness of their hearts like in the initial origin story. It felt like an extra factor that was really unnecessary, an attempt to make the Kents more broody and justified in their need of, helping a baby that they found literally in the middle of nowhere. And at number 7, 3 Jokers. Recently, DC came out with their Black Label imprint, comics aimed at more mature readers that are meant to exist outside of the main continuity for the most part. 3 Jokers is a 3-issue miniseries released under the Black Label imprint, except it was revealed by Jeff Johns that the 3 Jokers is part of the main continuity, which kinda confused some people. And this might be why. That imprint was inspired by a really ridiculous plot point that pretty much just disappeared entirely from the main continuity. So once upon a time in 2016, right at the end of the New 52, before Rebirth started up, Batman found himself in the Mobius chair, a plot device that basically gave him all of the knowledge in the world. Batman learns when he sat in this chair that there's actually 3 Jokers out there instead of 1. Then that revelation was dropped pretty much as soon as it was revealed, and hasn't been touched again since the mention of this Black Label 3 Jokers series. Oh boy. And at number 6, Damian Wayne. Back in 1987, DC released Batman Son of the Demon, in which he and Ra's al Ghul team up, and Bruce briefly considers becoming his heir. During that time though, Bruce has an affair with Ra's daughter Talia al Ghul, who ends up getting pregnant but then claims to have had a miscarriage. At the end of the story, it's revealed that she didn't have the miscarriage, and later on, Grant Morrison would introduce Damian Wayne, their son, the one who was conceived during Son of the Demon. Except, he changed some stuff. He was the product of Talia having drugged Bruce, forcibly sleeping with him in order to get pregnant as part of what she termed as a depraved eugenics experiment. So essentially she raped Batman, and Damian went from being the potential product of a heart-wrenching love affair to one that Batman had no choice in, since Damian's origins have been toyed with, including a retcon that suggested he was created thanks to cloning. Moving on to number 5, Hal Jordan as Parallax. Once upon a time, during the horrible reign of the Superman story arc that was the sequel to the even more horrible Death of the Superman story arc, I had to bring it up, Hal Jordan lost his shit after his home of Coast City was destroyed by Mongol and Cyborg Superman. This occurred in Green Lantern issue 46 and would become known as the Emerald Twilight story arc. A few issues later, completely distressed by Coast City being obliterated, Hal decides to use his power ring to try to recreate it, which is a big no-no for Green Lanterns. The Guardians of the Universe summon him for breaking the rule of using his ring for personal gain, which pisses Hal off even more. So he steals energy from the main power battery on the Guardians planet in order to finish recreating Coast City. The Green Lantern Corps have no choice but to stop him, but Hal ends up killing most of them, stealing each of their rings and leaving many for dead. It's then revealed in issue 50 that he's actually Parallax, the fear space insect of sorts. The literal embodiment of fear. Hal then sacrifices himself in the Final Night story arc, but then 10 years later Green Lantern gets a reboot and everything is retconned. Hal was just possessed, something that Batman would never really let him live down. Moving on to number 4, Barbara Gordon can walk. Again, back in 2011, DC introduced the New 52. The DC universe was essentially reset, with some bits of continuity remaining intact, funny enough. One of those bits of continuity that remained was Barbara Gordon's history with being paralyzed. This is something that occurred in The Killing Joke and saw the character trapped in a wheelchair, retiring from her days as Batgirl, only to rise up and reclaim her heroic identity once more by becoming Oracle. Barbara became an inspiration for physically handicapped readers everywhere, and she was still a total badass too, despite the serious trauma and continuous obstacles that her character continued to face and overcome. But then, the New 52 changed that. While the history was intact, so was Barbara's legs, or I guess technically her spine. Despite having Gail Simone pen the Batgirl series, fans were outraged with the new Batgirl volume for taking Barbara out of her chair and putting her back into the Batgirl costume. Apparently she had received some really helpful and experimental physiotherapy that allowed her to walk again. Many felt that this was harmful to a positive kind of representation that Barbara stood for in the comics previously as Oracle. The one good thing though that the series did explore was the fact that Barbara was still very haunted by her past, and her struggles with her paralysis. It wasn't something that she was just cured of and never addressed again, thankfully. But still, I mean, she's pretty badass as Oracle. Moving on to number 3, a man of many races. The Flash mantle has a history of annoying retcons over the years. One of the worst by far though is Wally West ceasing to exist, but then 2 Wally West existing thanks to retcon messy fun time. So at the start of the New 52 and the DC Universe reboot that came with it, Wally West does not exist, or at least the one we knew didn't exist. Another new Wally West was kicking around, but he was the biracial son of Rudy West. But then that black Wally West was retconned when DC Rebirth came around, which was yet another reboot of the DC Universe, in which the original Wally West was brought back, and this Wally West, known as Wallace West, was the cousin of the original Wally West and the son of the New 52 Reverse Flash, Daniel West. He was also kicking around. Confused yet? Well, don't worry, DC explained the same name thing as a product of the two Wallies being named after their great-grandfather. But really, it was just because people were really pissed that the original Wally West had essentially disappeared. And they didn't want to get rid of the black Wally West, so they just were like, they both exist! Good job, DC, good job. Next up at number 2, Watchmen. Watchmen has long been considered one of the most important graphic novels in the history of the medium. When it came out, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons were praised by critics for transforming a medium that was often considered to be low art into something that was complex, thought-provoking, and subverted what we believed comics could do. It was a game changer, and it inspired many writers and artists that followed. Watchmen has long been considered a sacred text that does not get touched. Until DC decided that they could milk it for more money. As you can guess, Alan Moore was not fond of that. It first started with Before Watchmen, a group of limited series comics that acted as prequels leading up to the events of the main Watchmen graphic novel. Some of them were great. Darwin Cook, prior to passing away, rest in peace, did a fantastic job with the Minutemen series, expanding on the characters that Alan Moore had so finely crafted without making them into something that, felt out of line. Others weren't as well done. But their sales resulted in an unfortunate domino effect. DC brought the Watchmen into the prime continuity of their comics, making Dr. Manhattan a villain of sorts in the Doomsday Clock limited series, which acted as a direct sequel to Watchmen and tied in stories from the New 52 and Rebirth, because that's exactly what we all asked for, was a sequel to Watchmen. Nobody wanted that. No one. And if you're watching this and you actually wanted that, just go read it again, seriously. Re-educate yourself. That limited series Doomsday Clock is still ongoing now, and apparently, by its conclusion, the DC universe will be forever changed again. Kinda sounds like one massive retcon in the works again, doesn't it? Doesn't seem uncharacteristic of DC. The reason why it lands on our list is not the fact that it takes something that's so darn good and threatens to ruin it entirely, it's because Dr. Manhattan has been turned into a plot device to explain all of the retconning of the New 52. Dr. Manhattan is said to be the one responsible for rebooting the universe and creating the New 52 universe. Essentially it is a retcon that was put in place to explain another massive retcon that a lot of people didn't really like. It also made Ozymandias regret what he had done in Watchmen, and that just isn't right. That's stupid. You cannot dilute a character like that. That's not fair, guys. And finally, in at number 1, Jason Todd is brought back. Finally, we have the silliest, most wretched retcon of them all. Jason Todd was brought back from the dead, and Superboy Prime punched him back to life. Alright, let's really break down Jason's history here. For starters, in 1988, when Batman's comic sales were suffering thanks to the low popularity of the new Robin, Jason Todd, Dennis O'Neil of DC suggests that allowing the audience to have an interactive experience and vote on a plot point in the comics would not only be a great way to attract audiences, but also solve their little Robin problem. In a 4-part story arc called A Death in the Family, readers had the option to choose to call in and vote on whether or not Jason Todd would survive from an encounter with the Joker. Fans voted that he be killed off. It was a really close call with a 72 vote margin, and evidence came out afterwards that hundreds of votes for Jason's death came in from a single person who had programmed a computer to dial the voting number every 90 seconds for 8 hours. Jason was brutally beaten to death by the Joker, and for a long time, Jason was considered one of the only characters in comic books to never be resurrected. It's almost like a rule. One of the only ones to truly stay dead, along with Bucky Barnes and Uncle Ben. But yeah, look how it panned out for all 3 of them, eh? Anywho, Jason was brought back to life. At first, the idea of him being resurrected was teased as part of the 2003 Hush storyline, but later in 2005, Judd Winnick brought him back into the fray with the Under the Hood story arc, with Todd having a vendetta against Batman, and it just went downhill from there, guys. Alright, there we have it, friends. There's a whole lot of retcons that we haven't discussed on this list, like the Convergence retcon that was basically a retcon of the Crisis on Infinite Earths retcon. So be sure to give us a shout in those comments if you would like to see us do a part 2. If you dug this video, spread the love, hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe to Top 10 Nerd for more lists just like this one. We also have a list on Marvel retcons, so be sure to check that out as well. In the meantime though, thanks for watching. I'll catch you all in the next video.